That's what I want too. So, I mean, the photographs just show up better.
They do, and you have great photographs.
So, and I enjoy the photography thing, and so anyway, I'm not going to do the bio thing. We're just going to go into California native salvias. So when I gave the talk last time to the group, when was that? I don't know, a few months ago. At the end of the talk, somebody, first question was, are these also sages? So I thought I'd get that out of the way. Yes, salvias are sages, is just the common name. Largest genus in the mint family, the Lamiaceae family, 900 species, which is significant. The next largest genus are the thymes, which are Mediterranean. There's 250 species. So that gives you an idea. The genus Salvia is huge. Typified like most mints, opposite leaves, square stems, sometimes more noticeable than others. The flowers are bilaterally symmetrical, so if you're looking at a flower and you cut it down the middle, it's going to be the same on both sides, but not top to bottom. 2 fertile stamens. And then in most California sages, salvias, the flowers are arranged in these verticillasters. We call them whorls, but really in salvias they're so darn dense they have a little different terminology. It's not just a very simple whorl of flowers. In some of them there are a lot of flowers packed into that verticillaster. So to give a little bit of perspective, let's sort of broaden it out a bit and talk about worldwide distribution because it is interesting. So Mediterranean region here, 250 species, so that's quite a few. Turkey alone has 90. Eurasia, 90 species. South Africa, which is Mediterranean region, there's 30. And then we're over here into Mexico, South America, down in Brazil, there's up to 500 species. And then we get to California, and the California tribe is called the Audubbertias, and there's 19 species. So we're kind of a small, tiny group. Another broad, interesting aspect that I find fascinating about salvias is a pollination mechanism called the staminal lever mechanism. And it is a way the flowers have evolved for the pollinators to distribute their pollen to get it onto the pollinator, whether a bee or hummingbird. And so you can see this is a Mediterranean salvia, very kind of traditional flower shape, being pollinated by a honeybee. You can see that's actually the stigma hanging out on top of that. But the staminal lever mechanism in the Mediterranean salvias and a lot of the South American ones kind of works like this. Let's see if I can get this to go. Oops.
Was there another video? Oh, there you go.
So the bee or butterfly would come in going for nectar, and then it pushes against the back of the stamens, and it has different arrangements, but they're often hinged like that, and it just is like a teeter-totter. And you can dissect these and just watch that thing go up and down. And it's I think it's fairly simple yet sophisticated. And so you can see on this bee, so right there, the stamens have dropped down and are dabbing just a little bit of pollen on the back of the bee. You can see the same with the bumblebee. These, again, are Mediterranean flowers. And even on this one that's slightly different shape. And so when the bee backs out, the stamens pop back up into the hood of the upper part of the flower, the corolla, and so they're protected. And when the bee comes in, they come back down. hummingbirds, so the Mediterranean flowers are more oriented, have evolved for bees, whereas the Mexican, this is very general, the South American ones have evolved for hummingbirds. And so you can see the same thing. Oops. Yeah, just the stamens there. And so if you see hummingbirds going to your salvia flowers, and then if you get a good picture of one coming away, you can see they're dusted with pollen on the top of their heads. So this would be, you know, a sampling of your South American ones, a lot of the common ones that we grow in gardens. And they're tubular, having evolved for a hummingbird as a pollinator for the most part. The California salvias are, you know, they don't really look like the Mediterranean ones. They don't really look like the South American ones. So they have their own sort of unique shape, yet they're still salvias botanically. I think someday the botanists will probably figure out, nah, let's call them something else. But for now, they're salvias, and we'll be happy with that. But you can see this is a fairly uniform representation of the California native salvias. So they're not tubular so much as the South American. They're not hooded like the Mediterranean ones. The stamens are a little more exerted, sort of thrown out into the world. They're not protected. So I'm going to run through a variety of species and cultivars that are, you know, offered in gardens or should be seen in more gardens from my point of view. And, you know, one of the most common ones that are seen in gardens is Salvia clevelandii, the Cleveland sage. This is an old plant of the cultivar Worthy Blue in my garden. It will probably be taken out this year. I'll be sad to lose it, but it is past its prime, and it keeps edging itself into my pathway, which is really fine when it's in bloom and the foliage is soft, but when it goes to seed, they're kind of bristly, and I find myself walking wider and wider around it. An advantage of having a Cleveland sage along a path, and for many salvias actually, is the fragrance of the foliage. And it's just amazing how many people I talk to, and I used to sell at a farmer's market in Chico. People were just passionate about the fragrance of Salvia clevelandii. And they, you know, it wasn't just, I like the scent. I mean, they love the scent, which is, you know, like a lot of the salvias, very difficult to describe. It has some eucalyptus, some camphor, a little bit of mint, you know, sort of the air in the desert after a rainstorm. It's very resinous and has a, you know, just difficult but very appealing fragrance. So this would be a more prime shape of the Salvia clevelandii, depending on the hybrid or selection, but 4 or 5 feet tall, 4 or 5, 6 feet across. They can get large, again, depending on the cultivar. Great blue flowers for, you know, they flower for me June, July, maybe late May. Since it's big and large, it's a good combination with, I saw this in a garden, thought that was perfect, the Romnea culturi. So a lot of the, what we call Salvia clevelandii are probably actually hybrids with leucophylla. And again, the common ones seen in sales would be Allen Chickering, Aromas, Pozo Blue, Worthy Blue. It's really tough to tell them apart. And I think they are probably fairly mixed up in the trade by now. They've been around a while, since they are not distinctive. Anybody's guess, but they're all nice. I kind of like Worthy Blue. Seems to have a little larger flower, nice colored flower, but hard to say. The Cleveland, kind of straight, more Cleveland sage would be Winifred Gilman. And Betsy Klepsch, named for, you know, local salvia guru, is like Winifred Gilman with dark purpley blue flowers, but in Betsy's form has a little bit of white flowers kind of sprinkled in among the whorls, which is kind of different and interesting. And a royal azul, which I'll show a picture of, is very dark, very much like Winifred Gilman. Just a way to use, this is a Clevelandia, I believe, Pozo Blue, just in kind of a fairly drought-tolerant garden in Chico. And where I live in Chico, it is hot. Terry said something about being hot in her garden, up to 85. And I'm thinking, we haven't seen 85 degrees all summer. That would be a cold day. So it's relative, but believe Chico is very hot. I think our average, we've rarely gotten below 95 this year, so it's tough. But the salvias thrive, and this is kind of a typical way to use it. Yarrows, nepidas, the butterfly, deer grass. It kind of just fits in with that Mediterranean, drought-tolerant native plant look. Winifred Gilman, you can see how much darker that is. And that one's a little bit smaller, 4 feet tall, maybe 4 feet wide, thinner, not as substantive. Some people say the fragrance is better. I don't think so. I prefer kind of some of the other ones, but really good electric blue flowers. The same, Winifred Gilman. A royal azul is, again, another selection. And I can't really say what the difference is. Very similar to Winifred. It doesn't look quite as vertical. When I've seen it, it's a little bit wider, a little more open, but same really good color. And so at this, I'll say something just in general, all these salvias are extremely drought tolerant. They do not need a lot of water. Some of them can take, fairly regular watering, but as a rule, very much on the low end of the scale. And this is a nice one. This is probably across Clevelandii and Pachyphylla. What you'll note on this, and I'll show you Pachyphylla later, are these bracts that kind of subtend the whorls, so they're kind of underneath. They make for kind of a plumper, more colorful arrangement of calyx, bract, and flower, which is often the case in salvias throughout the world, is that the calyx is often very complementary or setting off the flower in some way. Sometimes they're just green, but sometimes they're a little different shade of the flower. Sometimes they're kind of the opposite end of the spectrum of the flower. So they play a role. And then occasionally some of the salvias have very showy bracts, which are kind of modified leaves under the whorl of the flower. And this one you're getting, the calyx is colored, the bract is colored. Leucophylla, called the purple sage. Don't really know why it's called purple sage. The flowers are kind of, mauve to pink, light pink, so it's not purple at all. A wonderful landscape plant, because the foliage year-round is first-rate, I think. It's very silver, it's very compact, very dense. Let's see, Terry mentioned quail habitat under the grape. The leucophylla, the same. It gets very dense and woody. I have one that's 15 years old. It's probably 8 feet high by 10 feet across. It's not a nice looking specimen, but the quail do like it, and I will take it out at some point in time. But yeah, good silver foliage, nice flowers, excellent pollinator plant. And here it is in kind of a more formal setting, around a pool. And it looks good year-round that way, very easy to maintain. And again, the pollinators really like it, bumblebees, bees, butterflies. One of the cultivars is called Pinky. It's quite large, but it does have, just really nice pink flowers, much deeper, clear pink. And there's a number of leucophylla selections, and you just sort of, you know, depending, some of them are lower growing. Point Sal is maybe 3 feet by 6 to 8 feet. All the others tend to be a little larger than that, but that's a lower growing version. And there's going to be more out all the time because they are variable. And you'll get a sense through this talk that they do hybridize readily with other species. So that's a close-up of Pinky. And it tends to flower a little earlier than Clevelandii, more May, not for as long a period, but then you have the great silver foliage. So we're going to sort of, like a genealogy going through this, that so-and-so crosses so-and-so, and then this one crossed with this one, and so you'll see there's going to be a lot of sort of hybrid selection here. Desperado is an apiana, which is the white sage, crossed with the leucophylla. And Desperado, I really like it, but it is a big plant. I mean, we're talking, you know, 7, 8 feet tall by 7, 8 feet across. The flowers are large. The whorls are large and dense, and then the dried seed heads are quite kind of hefty when you cut the stems. And the woman whose garden I photographed this said she uses it for kindling. You know, which would be great because there's probably enough oil in there that it would just light up immediately, yet there's enough substance to light bigger things. It's very vertical. The foliage is like apiana. It's strong scent, but not quite as shiny. And this is honeybee. And so on the salvias, you know, you think about these stamens are kind of thrown out there to the wind, and the female honeybees, you know, their job is to collect pollen, and so they have to, you know, go to the ends of these stamens. In this series, you can't really see exactly, but, you know, she is gathering the pollen and putting it on her back leg, all while kind of hovering there and, you know, doing all these motions. So it's not, you know, it's not like getting on an aster or a chrysanthemum or something where the pollen is just sitting there and the bee can go around. This takes some effort. So then the white sage, a lot of people grow the white sage. It's one of the most drought tolerant. I mean, a lot of them are very drought tolerant, like I said, but this one is exceptionally so. Fussier about water. Summer water does not like summer water combined with heat. It is also kind of fussy about winter wet, as are most salvias. They do not like their feet wet in the winter. Don't plant them in a low spot where water collects and it's cold and damp. That will kill not only our California salvias, but actually most salvias don't like that. Even if they're ones that like water in the summertime, they don't like that winter wet on their roots. So the white sage, you know, can be a fairly compact plant when you take away the flowers, but then you add the flower stems that come up in all directions, it can take a fair amount of room. But the plant itself, you know, can be 3 feet by 3 feet. You know, great foliage, just stunning, you know, very silvery white foliage. And I find it fascinating on this one that the stamens are kind of thrown out to the side, and even a bumblebee is not making contact with them. So I'm unclear as how these really get pollinated, because it's not a hummingbird plant, maybe a moth, because it's white. So I'm wondering about that. And actually honeybees have a hard time getting into the flower, because it's very closed, and a honeybee has to work very hard to sort of get in and open it up. So a hybrid with apiana in Clevelandii is one called Vicky Romo that came out of Rancho Santa Ana a number of years ago. I really like this one. It has a foliage like apiana, again, kind of, you know, the silvery white, and really nice dark blue clear flowers. not commonly available, but you can get it down south sometime, I think at Theodore Payne and Rancho Santa Ana. And it gets large. I mean, it would be 5 feet by 5 feet. So now we'll go to Apiana, white sage, crossed with mellifera, the black sage. And this is one called Frankie Lee. And it has this small white flowers, Apiana, very vertical, has kind of a nice effect in the garden. And again, pretty large, 5 feet by 5 feet. Most of these salvias, you have to give them room. They're not ones that like to be crowded or pushed in with other plants kind of growing around. They do like space to open out. A similar, the same hybrid, parentage, starlight, fairly commonly available. For some reason, when I've seen Frankie Lee, it has a little more garden, appeal to me. Starlight can seem kind of wispy, but they're both nice. And Apiana and mellifera grow together, as a lot of the salvias do down south. So there's going to be more hybrids of these just through time. For me, the big thing is garden tolerance. I mean, if you're going to have a hybrid of something, we don't want it to be super tricky. We want one that will kind of tolerate some of our garden conditions, different soils. And if they get into the trade, generally they've passed that test. Black sage, very common in kind of the coastal mountains, very drought tolerant. Again, green foliage, which is nice. Not a favorite of mine for garden design. I don't know, again, it's not strong in the landscape. The flowers are kind of small. The foliage is green, not real strong, not a big, strong form to it. But very good pollinator plant. Attracts a lot of bees. And probably a lot of you might know the work they're doing at Berkeley, Dr. Gordon Franke, on urban bees and native bees, and studying native bees in urban environments. And so I talked to him about getting a list of the good salvia plants that I could put in the book. And this was one of the top ones that they found. They go out into gardens and they are catching bees, and they are keeping track of every species on what plant throughout the state. Actually, they're going, Southern California and the east side and Bishop. They go up to Redding, they come to Chico, they're doing the Bay Area. They're trying to get a sense of what plants that native bees are attracted to in our urban gardens. It's quite a fascinating study, but salvias are really good. And Robert Corrick was telling me just at lunch that he stayed with Rosalind Creasy, I believe, and this morning he said they got up and there were bees just covering this blue salvia that he wasn't sure what the name. It wasn't a native, but they are good pollinator plants. In some of the common selections of mellifera, green carpet, which I'll show a picture of. I think I have a picture of a couple of these. Tend to be lower growing, a little denser than just not the open shrub, something to make them, desirable, or trying to have a different, play a different role in our landscapes. I like this one, green carpet. I like that texture in design, having something low and green and not huge. Would get 4, maybe 5 feet across and barely 18 inches high. This one's a little more vigorous, a little taller, a little more open. So 2 other species, or 2 hybrids we're talking, are parentage. Mellifera, the black sage, by sonomensis. Kind of go into sonomensis in a little bit. This is fairly available. You see this a lot. Again, 18 inches by 6 feet, maybe a little bit more. A good ground cover. And Salvia sonomensis is probably our, I don't know, our lowest growing one. It is definitely a ground cover, foliage-wise, barely a foot, maybe 6 inches. You can see how it kind of is creeping along there, going up over a rock. It can be tricky. Again, very susceptible to overwatering in the summertime, bad combination, water and heat with a lot of these salvias. And the flowers, just, slightly different shape, kind of minus the top half of the corolla. It's more the bottom. Again, the stamens are just kind of thrown out there. And sonomensis has a wide coverage throughout the state, again, kind of coastal mountains, and also up into where I live in Butte County, where you can find it at, 2,500 feet to maybe 3,000 feet, kind of a narrow range. And that one happens to be very pale colored, almost white. And you see it along roadsides, in road cuts. Very popular hybrid of sonomensis with leucophylla. Bee's Bliss is vigorous, adapts well to gardens, is an excellent salvia for covering hot, dry banks. It'll be 18 inches high, spread 6 feet, and then continues to spread, as I'll show you. Looks great, I think, with deer grass or big rocks. It needs some contrast. Here it is, the same garden in bloom. I think a good use of this particular salvia is like rough rocks, kind of covering some ground, softening the situation that needs softening, and this will spill out over the rock wall there. And they will eat up pathways, even if you think you're thinking ahead and say, well, okay, your path is here, I'll plant it 4 feet or 5 feet, and pretty soon that's not enough. So just, don't plant too close to a path, because it's just, it's fragrant, it's very nice to cut it back, but you'll be doing it all the time. So just give them some room. So we're going to see if this works. Okay. Yeah, this is a great planting. This is in Butte County, up along Big Chico Creek Reserve, and the woman has a little guest cottage that she rents out, Chico Canyon Retreat. I'll give her a plug because you might want to see her salvia when it's in bloom sometime. And so this blooms in mid-April there. And I went up a couple years ago, and where we live and along the creeks there, the pipevine, Dutchman's pipevine, is everywhere. And so you get pipevine swallowtails. The pipevine, the Aristolochia, is a larval source for the caterpillars and the swallowtail. And in this canyon, there were a lot of them. And we'll see if this works. But it was really quite a sight to see that many butterflies. That is Bee's Bliss. That's the bee. But there were hundreds. And if I really had some good sound on my camera, I don't take video, by the way. Photographer, not a videographer. But the sound going with this, there were bumblebees and all kinds of bees, and I have a few pictures of those. But it was an amazing experience, really. And not, you need the pipevine swallowtail in abundance to have that impact, but the idea that they are really good pollinator plants, all the native salvias, for butterflies, not so much hummingbirds. You got to plant the other ones for hummingbirds. But so on this same plant, so we're getting a syrphid fly eating pollen, getting some protein. We're getting a carpenter bee that has gotten covered with pollen, going for nectar. Here's another syrphid fly. And up at the top is a bee fly going for nectar. So I mean, there was just all this amazing activity. I mean, I think I photographed maybe close to 20 sort of species of things. Another kind of, this is a big salvia. This is a selection or a hybrid with brandegii, which is very similar to mellifera. But this one has a good dark blue flower and really nice green foliage. So it'll get big, 4 or 5 feet by 6 feet, 7 feet. But nice, just nice contrast in color and foliage. And there's a monarch at the Pacific blue. Pachyphylla is a more desert or eastern California into Nevada and Utah. It likes it cold and not very wet. It'd be tough to grow in the Bay Area. I mean, you could get it to grow for a year or two, and then it would say, this is not the climate for me. It thrives in Denver. They use it in parking strips up there, in parks, and it is incredible. But our local Suncrest nursery, they have, the wholesaler out of Watsonville has kind of come up with a hybrid sonomensis probably and Pachyphylla, and it is really impressive. It is very showy and it looks to be fairly small growing, that maybe 18 inches by, I can't really say, but it doesn't look to be a big aggressive plant. Good color, really good bracts. Again, the calyx and the bracts have that rich burgundy color. They may have named it, but I'm not going to say because they may change the name. But it looks to be a good one. I don't know how fussy it will be, but with the 2 parents, something like that, I would plant in really well-drained soil and just give it minimal water in the summertime. And then in California, we have 2 annual salvias, which is kind of interesting. The chia, the columbary, and this was one that the Native Americans would use to roast. They would use it as a medicinal. The seeds are very mucilaginous, and they would use them for eye problems. And it's quite very colorful but small flowered. Easy to grow. If you have a little bit of gravel, just a little slope, scatter the seed, you'll probably have it around for a while. Not showy though, but interesting. And yeah, I just, there's and a lot of you are probably familiar with the chia seeds. Those are salvia. Well, this one, I mean, has the same properties. What is it? The omega-3 fatty acids, very high in that. The salvia that is mostly sold is Salvia hispanica. And it might be because they can grow, produce more of the seed. So I mentioned that it's sort of mucilaginous, and I heard a story recently. If you buy some of the seeds, and if you don't like them, don't put them down your sink. My brother-in-law was telling me he went to help somebody move. They had 4 plumbers come in 2 days trying to unplug. You can just imagine that. I don't know if you've eaten them, but they're really good if you put it with a little bit of yogurt and let them sort of swell up, and they get like tapioca, and they're, kind of a little slimy, but you can just picture them putting their snake down and pulling it out and then just having it fill back in again. And they had to get a specialist with some high-pressure balloon thing that went down and sort of pushed it out. So just a little warning. This is the foliage of the chia. And it really varies as to rainfall on the size of the plants. I mean, if this year they were tiny, good rainfall years, they can be up to 2 feet. This one I had never really seen her grown until this year, and it's an annual, and it was really beautiful. But just the variability of salvias is demonstrated in this plant. The foliage is, you know, maybe basal leaves, maybe a foot across. I mean, not the plant itself, but very spiny, very stickery. The bracts around the flowers, you could barely touch it. Again, thistle sage. I mean, it was well adapted, well protected, and beautiful flowers and really nice foliage. So those are 2 annual salvias. Random hybrid, Salvia Carl Nielsen. This is really a pretty one. The fact that it's low growing, maybe 3 feet by 3 feet. What do I want to say about it? It looks good for a few years, and then that may be about it. It tends to get very woody. It's hard to prune back, but spectacular flowers. And it's a hybrid with develandii and maybe mohavensis, and I'm not sure the other parents. Hummingbird sage. It's a great salvia. If you have dry shade, it'll spread, it colonizes, and it can colonize. I mean, it can keep going and going and going. So it's easy to sort of control and pull back, but you want to keep that in mind. But it does like part shade. If you plant it in sort of sunshade, it will migrate and move in the direction where it's happiest. Inland, it would move into more shade. You know, in a cooler climate, it might move out into more sun. Down at Rancho Santa Ana, just against a wall, I thought it was very effective. Interesting planting at the LA County Natural History Museum. I'm not sure what this would look like in a couple years if it spreads in with the coral bells. Looks to me like that could be kind of a big mess. But if they use something like bamboo barrier and kind of separated them, it could be really nice. And there's a lot of cultivars on that. This is kind of the typical flower color. Some of them are selected to be, the flowers will get 4 or 5 feet tall. And then there are these various color selections, but what's wrong with scarlet, the red? I like that. I mean, I don't think you can beat that. Magenta, yes. And nobody grows this, but I just wanted to throw it in. This grows in Death Valley. Again, just to show the adaptability of the salvias, that they can grow in really tough places. And I was really excited a couple years ago to sort of try and, I had seen Salvia dorii, which I'm going to show a picture of, down outside of Death Valley years ago. But I didn't take good pictures, I didn't know that much. But then a couple years ago, going up to the Warner Mountains, I knew that it grew on the east side of the Warner Mountains, which are up in northeastern California. You get up and you look 20 miles to the east, and there's Nevada, and Oregon is another 30 miles to the north. So very northeast, very cold, very dry, very rugged. And these are on the eastern slope, so it's even drier than the west slope of the Warner Mountains. And then here's this stunning plant. And the showiest things you could imagine, sort of growing on this scree slope that is the kind of slope where you hike up and you take 1 step up and 2 steps back, and you're trying to get up there to see these things. But just absolutely beautiful. And again, it's that calyx, the colored calyx, and the bracts that kind of set off that blue flower and make it even, more sort of pop out. And very nice. And I can't help but show a few pollinators. This is a bee fly with a long proboscis. And the Salvia dorii, there is a selection that is in the nursery trade that you can get. It's either called Trident, which is probably not the correct name. It should be called Gale Nielsen, but you can see them interchange. They say it's a hybrid of dorii and some other species. It looks very much like dorii. It won't be as compact as the plant we just saw. It tends to be a little more vertical, a little rangy, needs to be cut back, but the same really good flowers. And you want to grow it in very good drainage. It's not particularly fussy, but it'll just do better and bloom better, hot, dry, well-drained soils. Gee, more pollinators. That's a fly on the upper left looking like a wasp. Flies are actually pretty interesting.
Oh, that's gorgeous.
And so kind of nearing the end here, and maybe, I'm sure some of you know about Tassajara Zen Center behind Big Sur, what is about 15 miles east of Big Sur in the mountains there. And my daughter works there. She's in charge of the grounds for a year or so. And she had me come down for work period. Of course, she wants her landscape dad to come down and help with the irrigation and dig holes and plant. And it was great fun. And I'd never been there, been in these mountains before. And she hadn't even told me about all the salvias that grew there. And so I was there for 6 days. She said I could have a day off for hiking. Oh no, but no, we had 2 hours off. I had one afternoon where she said, okay, we can take a quick hike. And so we went on this half-mile hike, not too far from there. And so going along the trail, there's black sage, which is, very common, very fun to see. Huge swaths of hummingbird sage. I've never seen that in the wild. And these covered the size of this auditorium. I mean, you look at a ravine and, rocky sort of draw that's all rocky, and it would just be everywhere. So I want you to think about this, and I want you, if there are any botanists here or real hardcore plant people, this is my botanical quiz, is name a genera that in a half mile will offer up a woody shrub, an annual, a spreading ground cover that spreads by rhizomes, and then a woody ground cover, all in a half mile. And that's, I'm waiting for, ceanothus, you can see a lot of variability. You don't see an annual ceanothus. So here we have, I'll go back, we have the black sage, we have the hummingbird sage, spreading by underground rhizomes, huge leaves. So the black sage is kind of narrow, very resinous, fragrant. The hummingbird sage, large, resinous, fragrant. And then on this hillside, you can't really see them, it was a drought year, but all the little balls, you can see little balls in the grass, that's chia. So that was a hillside, and again, it grows on a steep slope, it needs that drainage. That was a lot of chia in with the grass. So there's our annual. And then we get the very top of Flag Rock, and we're looking down onto Tassajara, looking down there. And then there's Salvia sonomensis at the top, growing out of a rock. So that just really blew me away. It just, 900 species of salvias in the world, you can't help but see why. I mean, they are very adaptable. Clearly, they are ever changing, ever adapting. And with all the hybrids that I kind of talked about and the interspecific hybrids, that they are always adapting. And it's just very clear when you kind of see this in such a short distance. And that I had a great time down there, but that sort of ended my stay at Tassajara in a good way. And I think that is my last slide. So, thank you. Thank you for listening.
Questions?
Any Salvia questions?
Yeah, I'm wondering,